Now, one other issue here regarding the Electoral College. Um, a lot of talk about whether or not we need it anymore, why we even had it in the first place, and if it's a good thing or it's a bad thing. And I've heard people say that, I've seen some people post stuff on the internet saying that the Electoral College is in place so that one candidate wouldn't be able to just win a region and thus win the presidency. And I suppose there's some truth to that. Is it a fair way to do things? Well, I'm not really sure. I do know this, though. James Madison was opposed to the Electoral College at the Constitutional Convention. He was more looking for a system whereby we would elect our chief executive by virtue of popular vote. And it didn't come to pass because put yourself in that room in 1787 and you're debating the new Constitution. I mean, you probably went there not even knowing that you were going to draft the Constitution. You might have went there thinking that you were going to do something to the Articles of Confederation and see if we can do something to make our federal government stronger. And you show up and suddenly there's this new Constitution that is being debated and argued about. Now, let's say you're from South Carolina, and as part of the debate going on about how we're going to represent ourselves in this new Congress that's being developed and whether it should be by population or whether it should be an equal vote per state, what's going to be proposed is equal representation or by population. If you're from South Carolina, you're probably opposed to any kind of Congress which is going to be set up purely by population. I mean, after all, you're coming from a state that has very few citizens, and you're going to be at the whim of what New York, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania are going to shove down your throat because they have much larger populations. So that's not going to work for you. Now, we know what the compromise was. It was a bicameral legislature where every state is awarded representation based solely on the fact that it's a state in the union, but that we're also going to have another house in Congress which will be allocated, and the representatives will be allocated based on population. And we've had some ugly debates about, the three-fifths compromise and all of that. And I don't want to get into a moralistic argument at this point. Safe to say that that was an ugly time in American history as far as determining what the representation will look like. But nevertheless, that was the way of talking about how the representatives would be allocated in Congress. And the same formula was used to elect the president, solely for that reason. Again, put yourself in that room as a delegate from South Carolina. Do you want the president of this new government that is being formed to be elected by New York and Massachusetts? Probably not. You're going to want some mechanism in place to ensure that your citizens are properly represented in who is going to elect the president. So the Electoral College was invented really not so much to say that the dumb farmer in Virginia, who wasn't very news savvy, wouldn't have too much of a hand in electing the president. That's not really where the founders were going. They were more concerned about making sure that the smaller states, population-wise, had a say in how the chief executive or chief magistrate of this new government would be elected. So that was how the Electoral College came into place. Now, as we've moved forward 240 years and our demographics have changed immensely, maybe the Electoral College is important still, or maybe it's not. But I can tell you this. We don't want to go to a situation that we're electing the president by popular vote. Because in today's America, what would happen is it would be the president of California and New York. There are just not, we don't want the large urban areas dictating what happens to farmers in Iowa and Oklahoma and ranchers in Wyoming. They're part of the United States, and they have very, very different needs and very, very different desires as far as what's important to them and what's not in the governing of this nation. So, for every vote that's cast in New York, you need, 10 or 12 cast in some of these rural areas to make up for it. And that doesn't seem to me to be very fair. I don't think the Electoral College is the answer either. My answer would be that every state gets one vote. We would have an electoral college where it doesn't matter if you're voting in Alaska or you're voting in California. However the popular vote goes in that state gets to cast one vote for the President of the United States. Now this idea I debated somebody on Facebook about this, and they said that that was absurd, that California should have a vote in California should be as important as a vote in Alaska. And I would concede the point when it comes to the House of Representatives and the representatives that you're allocated. But when it comes to selecting the President of the United States, we are the United States. There are 50 states. So if 26 states decide to elect President XYZ, that really ought to be the President of the United States. I mean, I think regardless of population, the needs and concerns and wherewithal of the state of Alaska are just as important as the needs, concerns, and wherewithal of the state of New York. This would truly make one man, one person, one vote viable, because right now it's not. A person voting in Wyoming, their vote is, I mean, they cast a vote in the presidential election and they get to send 3 electors to the dance for their selection for the president. And if you are a person voting in California, you get to send 53. Put another way, if a candidate running for president wins the state of Wyoming by 1 vote, they get 3 electors. If that same candidate wins California by 1 vote, they get 53 electors. So how much more is the vote of the person in California worth versus the person in Wyoming? And I'm talking only about picking the President of the United States. I'm not talking about passing a bill through Congress. That shouldn't be the case. Now, if this idea is so absurd, consider this. If we were to use my idea and give 1 vote per state in the Electoral College, instead of doing all this crazy math, all right, first person to 26 on election night wins, it would not have changed this election, nor 2012, nor 2008, 2004, 2000, and going back further than that. Now, I haven't done all the math on it, but I can tell you this. If we go back 50 years, 1 state, 1 vote works. We would not have changed the outcome of any of our presidential elections in the Electoral College. What we would have done, though, is we would have changed the dynamic greatly. Because now a candidate needs to campaign in the state of Wyoming just as much as they need to campaign in the state of Florida or in the state of California. So why should the people of Montana never see a candidate for office? That state is just delegated Republican, and it's forgotten. It's taken for granted. No candidate is going to campaign in Montana, whether you're Republican or Democrat. You know it's going Republican. So we have these swing states that we talk about. We've got 5 or 6 states based on this Electoral College that are going to elect the president. And that's just not fair. It's just not fair that candidates have to spend all their time in Pennsylvania and Florida and Ohio and just forego the people of Washington, Oregon, and Hawaii. So I say 1 state, 1 vote, and that's the way we ought to go forward. Anyway, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to let me chat with you. I hope this is helpful. I hope you'll engage me in some debate and tell me why I'm wrong here and tell me why I'm wrong about the Electoral College. All right, thanks again.